calls for Labor Secretary Alexander Acosta to resign are growing louder as more details come out about just how much he knew about billionaire Jeffrey Epstein's crimes when he agreed to a light 13-month sentence, including daily work release and nights in minimum security. As we told you yesterday, it was Acosta who was the Florida U.S. attorney when the deal was cut. But as of this taping, Trump is still standing by his cabinet pick, and Acosta is more defiant than ever.
We believe that we proceeded appropriately. There is a value to a sure guilty plea because letting him walk, letting what the state attorney was ready to do go forward would have been absolutely awful.
Still, many, mostly Democrats, want him gone, including Massachusetts Congresswoman Katherine Clark.
There are two words we need to hear from him. I resign.
Instead of prosecuting a predator and serial sex trafficker of children, Acosta chose to let him off easy. If he refuses to resign, President Trump should fire him.
He should resign because he was part of a process which really exposes the two-tier criminal justice system in America.
I'm joined now by a law school classmate and friend of Secretary Acosta, Jennifer Braceras, who's also a columnist, senior fellow with the Independent Women's Forum. Good to see you. Along with former State Attorney General, who is not a former classmate and friend of Acosta's. He was a former Democratic candidate for governor, Scott Harshbarger. He is now senior counsel at Kasner & Edwards, was recently appointed to lead an external investigation into accusations of racism at the Museum of Fine Arts. Scott, it's good to see you. And Jennifer, thanks for being here. He didn't resign today at this 2:30 event. Should he have?
No, absolutely
Why not?
Because he didn't do anything wrong. And what this really is an election year collateral hit on the President of the United States. All of this was known when Secretary Acosta was confirmed. He was asked about it at his confirmation hearing, I believe, by Senator Ben Sasse, among others.
It was actually Tim Kaine who asked him about it. The only question,
okay.
I think, yeah.
But it was probed and it was looked into. And the bottom line is they struck an agreement which they believed was the best they could get at the time.
Well, you know, in response to Senator Kaine, who was the only one, I think, to ask a question, he mentioned that professionals in his office decided this issue. He said that again today at the press conference. At no time until this afternoon did he disclose what the Miami Herald reported recently, that he actually had breakfast 70 miles away from his office, I think at a Marriott, with the lead lawyer for Jeffrey Epstein. Isn't that something the Senate or the public should have known before his attempt to
I don't know about that, and
I
look at lawyers have breakfast all the time. I'm not really sure. I don't know the details of that.
It was followed with an email from the lawyer for Epstein thanking him and saying, let's make sure we keep this confidential until it's resolved. Not the meeting, but the whole deal. Should that not have been disclosed? I don't mean legally required to be disclosed. Should that not have been disclosed in his Senate confirmation?
But that doesn't change the fact that the agreement he struck was one that he felt was in the best interest of the public at the time, because absent federal intervention, he was going to get even a lighter
from the state prosecutors.
Correct.
Isn't that a legitimate thing? You were a state prosecutor. His contention is the state was going to let him off with nothing. And while 13 months may not be enough for people like me, it's 13 more months than the state was going to get him for, at least according to Acosta.
If those are the facts that exist, that's probably very true, because we see that here in Massachusetts often. The United States Attorney often steps in when they feel that the state prosecutors, for whatever reason, are not dealing adequately with matters. The second piece is, Jim, every prosecutor I know, him or her, has at least one or two cases that they'd love to do a do-over on years later when other facts, when other things come in. So I think that's one of the difficulties I see with this. Of course, it's high profile. Of course, it's a terrible predator, and it's good that the Southern District opened it up. But totally to go back and rethink and actually condemn a person's career for one case, unless this was a pattern, I find somewhat difficult.
So you're comfortable with him not resigning this afternoon either?
Well,
you don't think he should resign?
I think in terms of resign, what I understand is that actually as Secretary of Labor, he's actually been a pretty good force in the administration. Our default position today, partly because of President Trump, to every one of the appointees is resign, get out of there, when I'm not sure that that's always the right remedy.
His contention this afternoon, Scott, was that not only that, quote, professionals in his office decided, as he said to Senator Kaine in that 2017 hearing, but then when he had that breakfast, it was after the deal was cut, even though the deal was not mentioned in court for a few months. When you were the Attorney General of Massachusetts, if the professionals in your office cut a deal with a credibly accused serial pedophile who was a billionaire, who had connections with presidents and others, would you be notified and required to sign off? Would you demand that you sign off on a deal before they agree to it?
Sure, it's on me. It's on me. It's on my watch.
So is it credible for him to say he didn't do this?
What I wish he would do is just say, I was the U.S. attorney. I signed off on it. We made a deal. That was the way it went. I looked at the facts and circumstances. I agreed with it at the time. I look back in hindsight. It may have been a problem, but we did the best we could in the circumstances.
So I have to say then to both of you, there's another fact. This Miami Herald reporting, which I assume is going to win a Pulitzer Prize, at least in my estimation it should. The other thing is the investigators at the time who've been interviewed by the Miami Herald says there was overwhelming evidence that he was the serial predator, the serial pedophile, and he didn't have to be just charged with these lighter offenses.
So part of the problem from the federal perspective was that, as I understand it, the U.S. Attorney's Office didn't believe they could win the case on the law because you have to prove that you crossed state lines with the intent to commit the crime. So it's not just whether or not you knew he was a serial predator on a local level. You have to have a federal hook. There has to be a federal nexus. If you can't prove that nexus, you're going to lose your case.
You know, one more thing that causes me to question the credibility of your former law school classmate here. A federal judge in Florida is looking at reopening this
Right.
plea deal, and part of it is not part of it, hugely based upon something we discussed last night. I think it's the Crime Victims Something Act there, a federal statute that mandates, not optional, mandates that you notify victims. Not only was there no notification of victims, in that email from the chief lawyer for Epstein to the the assistant U.S. attorney who handled it, they mentioned not talking to the victims for fear that will get out. They broke the law.
Jim, you're right to point out all the criticisms, and he should be criticized. But the difference here is he entitled, as a U.S. attorney, to make a big mistake or not? Does it mean that
and not be held accountable? That's
no,
my question.
Well, and the question, this may be a way to hold him accountable, but the fact of the matter is, let's try to remember that this is happening now in our political campaign as well. We're looking back in time on people and making decisions. I'm not saying it's wrong, and you shouldn't be held to these standards, but the fact that, as to Mr. Acosta, I know that the details are lurid. There are going to be serious problems here. I think he ought to own it. I think he ought to stand up and say, whatever it was done, it was on my watch. I'm the person,
okay.
And that's the standard.
We got to go. We only have a second here. Do you think how soon do you think Trump's going to abandon him?
Well, I hope he doesn't. I hope Trump is as loyal to him as Alex Acosta has been to the president. I can never predict what this president will do, but Alex Acosta has been a loyal team player to this administration, and he has done nothing wrong. He was a good U.S. attorney, and the president should stand by him.
Okay, I got to make a clumsy transition to health care for a minute. It's an important topic. Nearly a decade after it was signed into law, the future of Obamacare will be decided first by a federal appellate court in Louisiana. As I'm sure you know, Congress passed a law last year which in part eliminated the so-called individual mandate. That's the part of the law that required all Americans to have health insurance. And then several Republican-led states sued to have the law thrown out entirely, arguing that without the individual mandate, the whole law is unconstitutional. A federal judge in Texas agreed. The judges in New Orleans heard arguments on the case yesterday. And obviously, this is going to get to the Supreme Court either way, and most people think prior to the November election. I would file this, if I were a member of the Republican Party, under be careful what you wish for, you just might get it. If this thing is repealed, my sense is the Republicans are savaged in the 2020 elections. There's no replacement. Donald Trump keeps talking about it. Am I wrong with that analysis?
Well, no, you're not wrong. I think the Republicans need to do a better job of messaging on this, first of all. Second of all, the political outcome and the policy outcome is really not for the court to decide, right? The court should make a ruling on the legal merits, irrespective
of the fallout. But if ultimately either they or Roberts flips, he was the fifth vote, obviously, to protect the law a while ago, and this thing is overturned, tens of millions of people with pre-existing conditions aren't protected.
I'm not sure that that's exactly right, to be honest
except
with you.
in states that have protections and that kind of. But let me just say, Donald Trump's the brilliance, and I mean this sincerely. Here's Trump talking about pre-existing conditions at a press conference on May 9th. Here's the president.
The Republican Party will always protect patients with pre-existing conditions.
Now, by the way, this is at the time when the Republican Party is suing to overturn a law that does protect. If he boldly asserts the contrary, will the public be confused enough that the Republicans can survive next
November? The man
November?
has lied sufficiently for so long, so successfully, that it appears to me that it will work. Just like he has an hour speech about how great environmentalist he is the other day.
Ago. So this may not be the ticket for the Democrats that I think it is.
It should be the ticket, because all we have to be, the Democrats, once again, if we're not careful, will pull defeat from the jaws of victory. We'll go too far and push it too far, as opposed to saying we stand for core health care, and we're going to make sure that people have it, and we have credibility.
10 seconds.
I think what's actually going to happen is that the court is going to find that the individual mandate cannot stand without the penalty. That's what the Congress took away, is the penalty. And John Roberts had said the only reason it survived was because it was a tax. So I think what the court will say is, without the penalty, there is no tax. The individual mandate fails, but it's severable. The rest of the law stands.
Got to go. Scott Harshbarger, nice to see you. Jennifer Braceras, you as well.
Appreciate
your time.